What do we actually mean by emotion? We use the word emotion for something that actually happens in two very different stages. And if you don't see the difference, then it's very hard to understand what your body is doing. When most people talk about emotions, they mean things like anger, grief, fear. But in my experience, that's actually the end of a process, not the beginning. Something happens first in our environment. There's a change in the body, a shift in energy, and you can feel it, not as a thought, not as a story, just as a sensation. This is what I've often called a body emotion in Mickel therapy. But even that term isn't quite accurate, because at this stage, it's not really an emotion in the usual sense. What we then call an emotion is what happens when the mind labels that signal and builds a story around it. That's where it begins to be an emotion. The mind comes in, starts to try and make sense of what you're feeling. It labels it. This is fear. This is anger. And very quickly, a narrative forms around it. Sometimes people think this is an anxiety, but often that's what happens when these signals aren't recognized or responded to. So we end up using the same word, emotion, for both the original signal and also the story that the mind creates about it. But they're not the same thing. From a physiological point of view, your body detects something first. It's a kind of mismatch that looks for a response to bring you back into balance. The hypothalamus responds and you feel a shift in your system. And only then does the mind label it as an emotion. So the signal comes first, not the thought. In my experience, these signals tend to fall into four types, which we've spoken about in other videos. Anger's about boundaries, grief about letting go, boredom about lack of fulfillment, and occasionally fear, which is about uncertainty or missing information. But each one starts as a felt energetic signal, asking for a response. The difficulty is most people don't stay with that initial feeling. They get drawn very quickly into the mind and the stories that it creates. To analyze, to think, to explain, to associate with past events or future uncertainties. But by then, you're already one step removed from the original signal, and the body's activated phase is left unresolved. Now, many approaches tend to get involved at the level of thoughts, beliefs, and interpretation, and that could be very interesting for them. But it's happening after the body has already signaled. The original signal hasn't actually been responded to, so the system stays activated. The mind can create very convincing stories, but the body doesn't lie in that way. It simply tells you what is actually happening in that moment. So the question becomes, Which one are you listening to? What we do in Mickel therapy is help people come back to that original signal, original feeling, to recognize it as it arises in the body and respond to it directly, to work with the feeling before it gets taken over by the mind's narrative. Because if you stay with it as a simple, authentic shift in energy, it becomes much clearer what's needed in that moment. And when these signals are responded to, well, the body's systems settle and activation naturally fades away. But when they're ignored or overridden, the system stays activated. And over time, energy begins to drop, the system becomes dysregulated and produces symptoms. So this really isn't about analysing emotions or trying to change your thoughts. It's about recognising that what you've been calling emotions start as something much, much simpler. A shift in energy in the body, which is why we call them feelings, before the mind turns them into emotion. And learning to work at that level, well, that changes everything. Thanks for watching. Bye.